lovely to be here with you tonight, and I'm very much looking forward to a bit of a conversation to have here. And just coming from Central Australia, my mob's Aranda, and the importance of having conversation can go so far. And I think it's about the energy that you bring. Mr. Enoch suggested, about us bringing a level of safety in regards to these sorts of conversations that can sort of be interesting, to say the least. And, thinking about some of the hope that Rob spoke about in terms of, we've probably made a lot of changes and differences, but it's probably a long way to go for us. And in terms of Sandy and recognising that, there's a lot of learning and understanding and growth and truth-telling to be had. So we have a wonderful opportunity to be able to hear straight from some of these amazing voices up here on the panel tonight. So I'm really, really honoured to be here. So we might start off with you, Dean, as you're the first up with the questions on the list. What is the voice and how will it work?
Thanks for the question. Thanks for being here. Before I get to the voice, I want to remind everybody where this whole conversation comes from, because we're all talking about the referendum on the voice and what does it look like, and I can understand those questions, but it's really important to remember that we're only talking about a voice because we were trying to address this question of recognition. We've been talking about how do we meaningfully recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people since 1788. And there's been many processes, and in the last 30 years there's been this really strong push to recognise Indigenous peoples in the Constitution. So it took until 2017 with the Uluru Statement from the Heart, when we finally asked Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples after all that time, what does meaningful recognition look like? That the Uluru Statement said, well, if we're going to do this recognition piece, and we should, it's got to be practical. It's got to be meaningful. It's got to have an impact on the lives of our families and our communities, because the issues that are facing far too many Indigenous peoples are too pressing and too urgent just to do symbolism. So the Uluru Statement from the Heart said, constitutional recognition has to be through a voice. So and I think it's really important to remind people that that is the origin of this question of the voice, because there's actually a lot of support for it. There's a lot of support in the Australian public to do this recognition, a very simple act of saying, of course, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are the first peoples of this country. Of course, there's 65,000 years of continuous culture. It is the thing that makes Australia genuinely unique in the world. No other country in the world is home to the oldest continuous culture on earth. And so when you talk to people, they say, well, this recognition piece, of course we should be doing this. So that is a very big part of the referendum. And not only do we get the recognition, we get to do something practical. We actually get to do something that has an impact on people's lives. All of the reports, all of the calls, all of the community activism over decades and decades about how do we actually deal with the issues facing our communities all lead to the same point. They all say the same thing. The solution, the foundation for the solutions facing our communities is by meaningfully, deeply engaging the voices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the decisions that affect our families and lives. We've seen them before, representative bodies made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, focusing on the issues relating to our families and our communities, providing advice to decision makers in Parliament and government about what actually works, not what gets cooked up in offices in capital cities, in Canberra and other places around the country. And there's a lot of good intentions there to try and find the solutions. But the experts are the mob on the ground. So the voice is a very simple concept. Representative body made up of Indigenous people, put there by Indigenous people, sitting outside of Parliament, independent from Parliament and government, answerable to our communities, and working with parliaments and governments to find the right solutions, to make sure that the investment made in Indigenous affairs goes to where it's needed, to make sure that there's accountability for the outcomes, and to make sure that mob on the ground have a direct line to those peoples on the voice to make sure that they're focusing on the issues that really impact our communities. So representation, advice on the issues that have a particular impact on our peoples. It is as simple as that, and when we come to the referendum, it will be a simple question of, should we recognise Indigenous peoples and should we have a voice? That is going to be it. That's as simple as the question's going to be.
Thank you, Dean. Awesome. Noel, I'll head to you. Now, many Australians are only now really hearing about or engaging with this discussion about the voice. However, we know that there has been a lot of work leading up to now. What work has brought us to this point, and why is it so significant?
Advocacy for the recognition and rights of our people goes back 100 years. And this year we have the opportunity to finally respond to that advocacy. What we are doing today is simply continuing the struggle of our people going back to the first quarter of the 20th century. This is an old struggle. The planets are finally lining up for us. There's a tremendous opportunity. The question of recognition is, of course, at the heart of it. For people who've been marginalised, who've been ignored and excluded, there is this imperative for recognition. It has long been an imperative. Australians have resisted recognition for 2+ centuries. We now have an opportunity, and I think most fair-minded Australians want that recognition to happen. But it's not just, in a sense, yes, we need to recognise the dispossessed original peoples. But there's also a sense in which, don't you guys need to be recognised? Shouldn't we be recognising you? And that's really the reverse message of recognition. When we do this for the first time, Australians will look in the mirror and recognise who they are. Because without us, I don't think you really understand who you are. You're not Australian if you don't have a place for Indigenous people in that identity. So really, it's going to be a mirror. Recognition is a mirror. Look into the eyes of fellow Australians and seeing yourself. So I've been a long advocate of the idea that Australia is made up of the original First Nations, the British settlers who came here and built institutions on this 65,000-year-old heritage, and the migrants who brought their heritage to Australia. Those three groups make up who Australians are. And those two latter groups are the ones that, as long as you don't have Indigenous people in the first peoples in the picture, I think you have an incomplete idea of Australia. It's fundamental to us understanding who we are as a nation and as a people. So we've got to do it. At this present time, we're well on the way to getting a majority of voters in a majority of the states, which is what the Constitution requires. We've got 5 of the 6 states. So this is possibly the most important meeting of this kind in this room. This is the state, our state, the state of Eddie Martha, the state of John Kula. This is the state that really has to be at the forefront of the referendum, and we shouldn't allow ourselves to be the one state that doesn't cross the line in October. So I want to urge the bipartisan Friends of First Nations group to really work on this. It doesn't make sense for us to waste this opportunity for our grandchildren. This is a simple but absolutely profound question that is going to be put in this referendum. It was for the large part of the last 11 years since Julia Gillard set up the expert panel in 2011. It was largely a conservative-driven cause. We were working with conservative governments in Canberra. Remember, Labor's been out since 2013. It was part of the policy of subsequent conservative governments. Originally Abbott, then Turnbull, and then Morrison. All of those three Liberal governments had constitutional recognition, not just legislative, constitutional recognition in their policy platforms. The last Morrison government actually put a budget into forward estimates to conduct the referendum. $170 million was allocated by the Morrison government to conduct the referendum. This is what is so bizarre about what is taking place now. Conservatives are disowning their own agenda. I'll say one last thing about that. It was actually John Howard that kicked off the proceedings in 2007. Howard who said at the election, I will put a question for the recognition of Indigenous Australians within 18 months if I'm re-elected. And of course he wasn't. Kevin Rudd had committed to the equivalent policy. So I would urge the Queensland opposition in particular to really let's not lose the opportunity. Let's make a sensible decision for Queensland. Let's not make the country and Indigenous people victims of a confected political fight between left and right, progressives and conservatives. That's not what this is about. And we'll have an opportunity to speak further about the nature of the recognition that is proposed and what its benefits will be. I really want to urge that Brisbane and Queensland are tremendously involved to the referendum. I'm very confident we're going to get 5 of the 6 states. I just wouldn't like my home state to be an exception. This is my state. And I really want the government and the opposition to really think seriously about how we can make Queenslanders vote for the right thing.
Thank you, Noel. A lot of insights and the history leading up to all the discussions that are happening today. Thank you for that. Now, moving from somebody who's been in the game a bit longer than maybe the others on the panel, and a bit wiser maybe, we're going to head over to Samara in regards to First Nations people are overrepresented across many areas, including lower life expectancy and high incarceration. The 2022 Family Matters Reports highlights the overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in out-of-home care. How will the Voice proposal make a difference to young people growing up in Queensland?
Such a big question. And one that I am confronted with on a daily basis. Our organisation, DIGE, we're a youth organisation, youth founded, deadly inspiring youth doing good. Because of about a recognition of that our young people are freaking amazing. They have strength that is not normally seen. It is not the norm to see in media how amazing our young people are. The things they think about, the dreams that they have, like, it blows me away every single day. And yet, our organisation works on two ends of the spectrum. We talk about this space of our young leaders developing and challenging the status quo, of taking that deep-seated feeling that we, as young people, as First Nations young people have, there is hidden beneath the surface a sense of hopelessness, a sense that the status quo won't change for us because the people who are supposed to protect us can't, don't, won't, who knows. And that sense of hopelessness we had to grab a hold of and find something to be able to challenge it. We had to find some glimmer of hope, and we found it in each other. We found it in looking to our elders, our leaders who have come before us. Yeah, point this way too, because you didn't know. But our leaders who have come before us, who have done hard work to start to challenge that status quo. To recognise that what we inherit as young people should not be the same fight. We still face quite a significant number of challenges with our young people in our child safety systems, in our justice systems. Their human rights are breached. Young people are locked up for more than 24 hours a day. Like the full day, they don't, consecutively. Young people are denied opportunities to connect with their family when they're in out-of-home care. Young people are forced onto the streets because we can't provide a placement for them. It is really hard to find hope sometimes when you're faced with that reality on a daily basis. But we know, in all of that, there are these young people, and that they have these ideas, and it's actually really purposeful. So, tell my little story now. It was Youth Week. Last week before? Last week. I don't remember. We ran an amazing event, Ultimate Games Night. Go look it up, it was really deadly. 70 young people, it was epic. And we took the opportunity to run a quick survey. And we asked these young people, do you feel like that you have a space where your voice is heard, where you can talk about change? 30% of our young people, of our respondents, said no. Straight up no. The remaining all said yes, but. They said yes, but they don't know where to go. They don't know who will listen to them. When we talk about practical change and a voice to Parliament, when we actually talk about knowing where to go, we can't go to Warren Edge. Much respect and love to him. But we need to go to people who actually understand what it means. When we're talking about the challenges that we face, our culture, our sense of responsibility to our own young people, to our peers. Our responsibility as young people to wear two hats at the same time. To learn from our wisdom that is shared with us, and to be able to envisage a future, to be able to dream about a future that is amazing. That is what our responsibility is as First Nations young people. And in order to do that, we need people that can understand us, that can hear us, that are safe. And without that, we will continue to see the same status quo that currently exists. The numbers won't change if we do not achieve this. They'll get worse. It's not a if, it will happen if we do not achieve a yes.
Thank you, Samara. I'm going to head over to you now, Dean, and there seems to be growing support for the principle of a voice, but why should it go in the Constitution?
Well, you can't do the recognition piece without the referendum. So that's the first part of the answer. And there's a couple of reasons why the form of recognition needs to be in a voice and therefore needs to be subject to the referendum, so it has the protection of the Constitution. First and most basic is that we've seen this before. I said in my first response that the kind of formal process for recognition started 30 years ago. Following the Mabo decision, Paul Keating tasked our voice at the time, ATSIC, with coming up with a set of proposals that was eventually called the Social Justice Package as to how to move forward after that decision. We got native title, we got the Native Title Act, we got the Indigenous Land Fund. The Social Justice Package was the third and yet still undelivered part of that response to Mabo. And as part of that, he tasked ATSIC with coming up with a report, the Social Justice Package, and that report was called Recognition, Rights and Reform. So the body, and incidentally, two of the co-authors of that report are Linda Burney and Patrick Dodson. So they've been at this for a very long time. Auntie Lowitja O'Donoghue was the chair of ATSIC at the time, and the person of the chair of the committee that drafted that report is no longer with us, Uncle Charlie. So we've been at this a long time, but the body that gave us that report to the Prime Minister in 1995 no longer exists. The body that replaced it, the National Congress, no longer exists. We just keep going through this endless cycle. We get the reports, we get the Royal Commissions, we get the inquiries and the committees. We read the reports, they all say the same thing. We've got to have a voice. We've got to have that representation. We've got to have that influence over policies and laws. We go through the process of building them, of doing the consultations, we run them, and then a government decides that they don't like what they're hearing or they're finding some problem and therefore it gets abolished. And then we go through a process, a period where there is no voice, there is no representation. Our issues go backwards. And then we do the whole sorry thing all over again. Over and over again. And in the course of my lifetime, we do it on average once every 7 years. We know what's needed. We don't need more reports. We don't need more Royal Commissions or anything like that. We just need that voice. And we need that voice and the continuity of that voice to not worry about who's going to be elected at the next election. Not sitting there on tenterhooks worrying about whether the reforms and the agenda that have been built up over a few years is now going to come crashing down because it's gone from red to blue or blue to red. That this voice can have the independence and the stability and the security to give that fearless and frank advice, to impart that wisdom that is needed, regardless of who's in power. So that constitutional guarantee is important for that stability and security. And the reports still today say, if you actually look at the closing the gap reports, which we all do, some of the gaps aren't projected to close for another 70 years. The incarceration rate gap, even if it meets its target year on year, which it isn't, is a 70-year target just to reach parity. Just to get to zero. Out of the red, into zero. 70 years. That's why we need the continuity of the voice. Because we've got decades of work to do. Decades of work to do just to get to zero. So that's the first reason. And there's another reason that is very important. And I say this with due respect to the house in which we currently sit and the members in which populate it. We have left this question of the creation, custodianship, and survival of a voice to the politicians. The previous voices have always been a product or a creation of legislation or some other instrument that once made can also be unmade, and history shows will be unmade. What's different this time, and this was the big difference that came out of Uluru, a profound difference that hasn't been properly acknowledged. Rather than, as we have with previous proposals, Yirrkala Bark petitions, the Larrakia statement, the Barunga statement, all powerful statements of reform and culture and change that represent incredible consensus by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples over the years. At a ceremony given to the Prime Minister of the day, with the media in tow, taking photos, and the statements being given in the hope that they would be acted upon. And then those statements being taken away to offices and parliamentary buildings, hung on the wall, left to be treated as a decorative art piece. Because they look pretty as well. Because we took the effort to invest our cultural capital into them, the story of our peoples into them, that surround the actual words of change. And you go to Canberra and you can still see them on the wall. Still unresponded to, still not acted upon. We didn't do that with the Uluru Statement from the Heart. There's a reason why it's not sitting in Parliament right now. We didn't give it to the Prime Minister or the government. We gave it to the people. That was strategic. It wasn't a marketing trick. It wasn't because we didn't like that particular Prime Minister or government. It was strategic and deliberate. We know the histories of referendums in this country. 8 out of 44, it's a refrain. We're going to change it this year, it'll be 9 out of 45. But 8 out of 44, we know how difficult it is to change the constitution in this country. And yet we believe the Australian people have a better chance of getting it right than the politicians do. That's why we gave it to you. That's why, with respect, the conversation that's happening in Canberra right now, government versus opposition, Labor versus coalition, Albanese versus Dutton, is actually all besides the point. It's not about them. They get the same vote that you do. That was deliberate. So it is absolutely critical that not only do we need a referendum for the constitutional recognition piece, the moment that is tapping us on the shoulder now, this generation, this history, is because we need all Australians. We need millions of Australians to give their assent and say, this is important and this must happen. And we're not just speaking to this generation, we're not just speaking to 2023, we're speaking to the generations that come afterwards, that say the voice must exist. And yes, it is up to the Parliament after the referendum to finalise the model, finalise the details, finalise exactly how it'll work. But they will do so with millions of voices ringing in their ear saying, we're watching, this is important, make sure we get it right. That's why we've got to go to referendum.
And definitely some sobering information and stats in regards to our mob. That's something that unfortunately we're a bit used to at the moment. So some consistency is what we're looking for. So thank you for that. I'm going to head back over to come down this end of the panel and just to talk to you about that much has been said about the need for more detail being required before Australians can make an informed decision when we vote. How do we ensure that all Australians can cast an informed vote in the referendum?
Yes. The provision is very plain. It's easily understandable if you read it. Basically says there will be a voice. And secondly, it will have the function of making representations to the Parliament on laws and to the government. And thirdly, that Parliament will legislate in relation to all of its functions and election procedures and so on. Those are the three basic provisions. And all of that in the cause of recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first peoples of Australia. So those are kind of four components. Doing this in recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first peoples. One, there will be a voice. Two, the voice will have the function of making representations to the Parliament and the Executive. And thirdly, everything about how it functions will be determined by the Parliament. That is a safe formula, safe set of words that are proposed to be put in. They're words that were actually run by two of our Chief Justices of the High Court. You don't know how many boxes we've ticked over 15 years. Firstly, it was a Conservative proposal supported by scores of people whom I could name here tonight on the Conservative side of politics who said, yeah, I can support that. And now saying that they don't support it. We had dozens and dozens of National Party MPs in favour of the voice proposal when the Conservatives were in power. In fact, there was a kind of proportionally more National Party people in favour of it than Liberals. My disappointment with the position that Little Pratt took was just so it was so deep. But of course the issue was when you're trying to do this over 15 years and they're changing. The Liberal Party room and the National Party room, they're changing all the time, and you got to go back in and talk to a new set of MPs. And I went into the room with Senator LNP Senator for Queensland. He had his coloured socks on, I still remember it. Rainbow socks. He said, oh yeah, that sounds good. I'll support that. And now he is one of the hardest core opponents of it. It's completely because, you know, cat says one thing, dog wants to do the other thing. North Pole, South Pole. You go red, I go blue. You say up, I go down. And that is unfortunately the only explanation I know of why people who committed so consistently to supporting the voice are now opposing it. And it's really, it's a terrible thing. But I don't think that's where Australians are at. Where the politicians in Canberra are at is at a different place from where Australians are at. And, you know, we've got, the challenge is majority of voters in the majority of the state, that's 4 out of minimum of 4 states we need on board. And we're only missing 1 at the moment. And only very narrowly. So we're going to do a lot of work in Queensland. The question about detail, you know, one of the most important cherished principles of constitutional conservatives is Parliament should control everything. Parliamentary supremacy. And this proposal is anchored in parliamentary supremacy. Everything is determined by the Parliament. So when they ask for detail, we quite rightly turn around and say, well, you'll be responsible for the detail. You'll generate the bill and pass the bill. We've got no say over that. All we can do is lobby and give our advice and say what we're happy with and urge you to do it like this rather than like that. But at the end of the day, it's Parliament that's going to furnish the detail. And that's what the proposal says, the words. We get 2 former Chief Justices of the High Court literally drafting the provision for us, or oversighting the drafting of the provision. We've got the beat up about detail is really the politicians saying, well, we want parliamentary supremacy, but you guys tell us what the detail is. In fact, a lot of work has been done on our side through the process of the last government. Professor Langton and Tom Calmer did a lot of work. Mick Gooder and I were on the design group that came up with that report. There's a lot of work. But all of that is subject to the Parliament generating a bill and going through the normal parliamentary process to tell us how. One of the things I'm going to push for when the Parliament comes to do that is that kind of the voice is the speaker in Canberra. Well, the microphone, I hope, is back in Arakwal. The microphone is in Cairns, speaking for the Cape. You know, the microphone's going to be in Alice Springs. It's just as we want the voice to be a conduit for those voices. One last thing I want to say is I'm hoping that in Queensland we will have alignment between the national voice and the state voice. And that we shouldn't duplicate a separate structure. We should have a perfect alignment, because that's going to be the most workable result. We don't have 2 shadow structures, one advising the state and one advising the Commonwealth. From the community's point of view, we want to be able to advise George Street and Yarrawonga. And I think we've got an opportunity to do that, given what Queensland is doing. for there to be complete alignment between what we do in Queensland and what is done with the voice at the national level. So I just once again want to urge the opportunity here. There's a lot of detail. I can talk all day and all night about how I think the practical benefit of this is going to play out. It is the most important thing for us to do. In structural terms, the voice and the legislation underpinning it is going to be the most important thing to do to close the gap. And I think that'll be a great boon for advancing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Queensland.
Going to head back over to you, Samara, and ask you, how will the voice incorporate the genuine voices of people, including young people from communities across the nation?
Yeah, look, I think a very important one that I'm very passionate about. Part of the work that, I was talking about in terms of the report that Tom Calmer did and Marcia Langton did, they did those consultations. Myself and my colleague Stacey, and we took a young person with us who knew nothing about politics. We went to that consultation and we talked about the importance of having young people represented as part of this conversation and as part of the voice. Because as young people, that unique role that we play is very, very important. Because when Dean talks about 70 years, well, he'd be dead and gone. You know? Good ways. Good ways. You know? But the young people will continue to be there. So when we talk about this sophistication of being able to teach and learn and grow our young people to be ready to be able to be in these positions where they can effectively give the right advice, this is about continuity. This is about how we have done this for generations. We have always taught our young people by watching, by learning, by doing. I didn't learn to sit up here and talk to young just by magically turning it on one day. It's because I sat with elders, I sat with leaders, I watched, I listened, I analysed, oh, why are you sitting like that? Oh, how, you know, all them things. Because that's what we do. We ask questions. We've got to put young people in the space where they can do that and learn that process. But young people also see things, I think, quite uniquely, quite unfiltered. They see things in the way it should be. And a lot of the time as we kind of get older, we get burdened by, well, that's just the way it is. That's because that's the way that structure works, or that system works, or that's that rule. When young people are going, well, change the rule. Good ways. Fix it. And make it better, and it needs to do this. It needs to enable us to do this. And what it looks like, well, we need to be able to shape it and do it. And for me, that's the most practical sense of how young people and our mob will be able to shape what legislation comes our way, or, you know, before it even happens. That the issues, the things that we see that are consistently putting barriers and blockages and disempowering our people, to be able to finesse them. Right? That for me is the practicality of it. And you know, one proposal in Tom Calmer's proposal, there's a lovely youth voice there that sits as part of it. So yes, and we'll be advocating when the referendum is won and done, and that should still be part of the detail. Because this is the way that we are. And I sometimes really struggle to go, how do I explain our way of thinking, our way of just learning, of understanding, of being shaped and being selected, and knowing that there are different young people for different roles. Because as we get older, we end up in different roles, you know, because that's our way, that's our practices. And this voice is that unique melding. It's that unique melding of understanding this system, this parliamentary system, and this thing that sits outside, and be able to influence it by still valuing what we have, by still valuing the way that our culture is demonstrated every single day, in the way that we raise our families, in the way that we learn, the way that we grow, you know? And some, people try to explain how you do this or what is that, or you feel do that differently than us. How come you feel do that different? Why does that all happen? And no, I'm just a young person. That's the way it is for you, you know? So these two things and these two systems where they are what they are, this is this really nice, unique meeting point where we have the opportunity to talk about both and value both. Value the system that exists, this parliamentary system, and value that 65,000 years of culture that runs through these veins, that is taught to me every day. That is it.
People do have a different perspective on other things, and they love to share it, especially if you have kids. And they like to tell you how it is. But I just want to go to one final question for our panelists before we open the questions to the floor, and which is, what role can corporate and business, civic and community organisations such as sporting organisations play in this referendum?
There's two roles, really. Broadly speaking, the most important one is understanding that these organisations have access to millions of Australians, be they employees, be they customers, be they members of sporting clubs or associations, and these are people that are out in the community on a day-to-day basis. They're voters. And so there's a big role for organisations to educate, to create spaces, to make sure that their employees and all of those people that are associated with them are hearing about this, are learning about it, are getting better awareness, because we know that once people start hearing about it and learning about it, they're more likely to get in behind and support it. So we absolutely encourage organisations to use their communications channels to engage. That's the starting point, and we've been doing a lot of work over quite a bit of time to actually make that happen. There'll be a time also when we want those organisations to stand alongside with us and use the power of their, reputations to get behind and support the campaign as well. But that's got to follow. That's not got to lead. That's got to follow the community voices, the conversations that have to happen on the ground about why this is important. Why this is important to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and why this is important more broadly to the country as a whole. So getting that education awareness piece out, and then when the time comes, getting out and about very loud, very strong, very positive about why they're getting behind and supporting it. I'd just say watch this space because that's coming.
Thank you for that, Dean.
How do I add to that? It's about yarning, pure and simple. It is about supporting and providing space for those collectives, employees, members, whatever, to have space to yarn. There is some amazing training out there. You can go watch Dean talk a little video on, about it. Together, yes, all them things. Like, there's heaps of resources now that are coming out and will continue to come out over the course of this period to build our capacity, right, to have these yarns independently. You don't need the three of us good ways to sit up on a panel to have a yarn about this stuff. There is enough information and opportunity and access to be able to dispel the myths, dispel the mistruth, and have them yarns collectively and building safe space. That's what this is. This is about having them safe yarns. Do that and man, you have some real deadly, interesting yarns. That'll be, I'm gonna fly the wall in them places, eh? Yeah.
Thank you all for that.